Do not ever give humans unfinished ideas, Ambassador Sorenvale whispered as the applause echoed through the Grand Assembly Hall. They never leave them unfinished. Most delegates laughed, assuming it was another old diplomatic joke left over from first contact. They would stop laughing less than 24 hours later. The Hall of Stellar Accord had been built to make every visitor feel small. Crystal arches stretched hundreds of feet overhead, reflecting the soft light of a distant blue giant across polished floors that looked more like still water than stone. Representatives from more than 100 civilizations filled the circular chamber, dressed in everything from ceremonial armor to flowing robes woven from living fibers. Cameras hovered silently above the audience, broadcasting the event across the known galaxy. At the center of it all stood a simple platform where the newest member of the Galactic Compact was about to receive the greatest technological gift in recorded history. Humanity had earned the vote by the narrowest margin imaginable. For 12 years they had honored every treaty, settled every border dispute peacefully, and surprised even their harshest critics by refusing to exploit weaker worlds. Some still believed humans were reckless. Others called them lucky. But enough delegates agreed on one thing. Earth had matured. It was finally ready. High Chancellor Elian raised a small metallic prism no larger than a paperback novel. It looked almost ordinary, yet every engineer in the room understood what rested inside. The complete architectural framework for faster-than-light navigation. Not just the engines themselves, but the mathematics, the field harmonics, the stabilization systems, everything that had taken older civilizations centuries to perfect. On behalf of the Galactic Compact, Elian announced, "We welcome humanity into the community of interstellar equals." The chamber erupted into applause. Human delegates stood and smiled politely, while cameras captured history from every possible angle. At the edge of the delegation, Dr. Nathan Brooks accepted the prism with both hands. 41 years old, wearing an ordinary Navy suit instead of a ceremonial uniform, he looked more like someone attending a business conference than one of the brightest aerospace engineers Earth had ever produced. Reporters expected a speech about peace, unity, or scientific progress. Nathan simply thanked the Chancellor, nodded once, and quietly returned to his seat. His colleague Olivia Carter leaned closer and whispered, "You realize everyone back home is celebrating right now." Nathan smiled without taking his eyes off the prism. "Yeah," he said softly. "I just keep wondering what they missed." Olivia laughed. "Missed?" "Nathan, they spent 400 years building this." "Exactly." He turned the prism slowly in his hands, watching tiny streams of light move beneath its transparent surface. Nobody spends 400 years solving one problem without creating 3 new ones. Across the chamber, several senior delegates watched the human engineer with quiet amusement. The Valerians exchanged confident smiles. The Orith scholars congratulated one another on another successful expansion of civilized knowledge. To them, the transfer marked the end of a long educational process. Humans would study the technology, spend decades adapting it, and eventually become reliable contributors to galactic commerce. That was how every young civilization had done it before. Nathan wasn't listening to any of the speeches anymore. His attention had narrowed to one tiny section of the field equations scrolling across the prism's interface. His brow tightened. His thumb stopped moving. Then he asked a question so quietly that only Olivia heard it. "Has anyone ever measured what happens to momentum after the jump?" Olivia blinked. "I don't know." Nathan looked back toward the celebrating delegates. Hundreds of brilliant minds filled the room. Thousands more watched from research stations across the galaxy. Yet, judging from the silence that followed his question, not one of them had ever thought to ask it. Nathan did not attend the reception. While diplomats sampled imported wines and exchanged speeches about a brighter future, he walked in the opposite direction carrying the prism under one arm like a borrowed library book. The Galactic Research Annex sat only half a mile from the Assembly Hall, connected by a glass corridor overlooking the endless lights of Capital Prime. Olivia caught up with him halfway across. "You are seriously skipping the biggest party in human history?" she asked, slightly out of breath. Nathan shrugged. "Free food will still exist tomorrow. People are going to think you are rude." "People usually do." She laughed because that answer sounded exactly like him. Inside the research annex, the atmosphere could not have been more different. There were no cameras, no speeches, no applause. Just rows of workstations, humming servers, and engineers already unpacking centuries of alien science. Mason Grant looked up from a console as Nathan entered. Please tell me you came to celebrate. Nathan placed the prism on the table. I came to ask questions. Mason groaned. Of course you did. Claire Donovan rolled her chair over with a cup of coffee in one hand. All right. What is bothering you? Nathan activated the prism. Thousands of glowing equations expanded into the air, forming layers of rotating mathematical models that drifted above the table like floating architecture. The room became quiet. Even after decades in aerospace engineering, seeing the complete framework of faster-than-light travel felt almost unreal. Claire shook her head slowly. I cannot believe they just handed this to us. Nathan studied one section without blinking. That is exactly what worries me. Mason folded his arms. You think there is a catch? No. Nathan answered. I think there is a blind spot. Olivia pulled another chair closer. Based on one question? Nathan nodded. Every civilization that developed this technology shared research with the next one. They inherited assumptions along with the equations. Mason frowned. Meaning? Nathan reached toward the projection and highlighted several field variables. Look here. Every jump sequence assumes the pilot wants to arrive safely with the ship intact. Claire smiled. Well, yes. That is kind of the point. Exactly. Nathan replied. Every equation optimizes safety, stability, passenger survival, navigation accuracy. Nobody bothered asking what happens if those priorities change. The room fell silent again. Olivia leaned forward. Nathan, what are you thinking? He stared at the equations another few seconds before answering. Nothing yet. That is the problem. Mason walked around the table. You have that look again. What look? The one you had before solving the lunar cargo oscillation problem. Claire nodded immediately. Or the orbital elevator failure. Olivia smiled. Or the atmospheric glider project. Nathan sighed. I hate that everyone recognizes my face now. Mason pointed toward him. Because every time you make that face, someone ends up rewriting engineering textbooks. Nathan ignored the joke and opened a simulation window. Let us stop guessing. For the next several hours, the celebration across the city became little more than background noise. Fireworks illuminated the skyline while music echoed through public plazas, but inside Laboratory 7 only keyboards clicked and processors hummed. Every simulation produced the same answer. Nathan adjusted variables. Claire checked energy consumption. Mason rebuilt navigation models from scratch. Olivia compared alien documentation against human calculations. Midnight passed. Then 2 o'clock. Coffee replaced dinner. Nobody complained. Shortly before sunrise, Nathan suddenly stopped typing. His eyes narrowed as a single line of data appeared on the screen. He whispered so quietly that the others barely heard him. That cannot be right. Olivia stood beside him. What did you find? Nathan looked at the simulation, then back at the glowing prism resting on the table. Either every civilization in the galaxy overlooked the same question. He paused before taking a slow breath. Or we are about to discover why nobody ever thought to ask it. Nathan replayed the simulation 6 times before anyone spoke again. Every variable changed except the result. The virtual probe completed its faster-than-light jump exactly as expected, arriving at its destination with perfect navigational accuracy. That was not the surprising part. The surprise came from everything the alien software ignored. Nathan slowly stood up from his chair and rubbed both hands across his face. They never measured it, he said quietly. Mason looked at the screen. Measured what? Nathan pointed toward a tiny column of numbers buried beneath thousands of lines of navigation data. Residual momentum. Claire frowned. The jump ends. The ship arrives. What is left to measure? Nathan walked to the whiteboard mounted against the laboratory wall and grabbed a marker. He drew a simple circle representing a planet. Then he sketched a ship approaching it. Imagine driving your pickup truck down a highway at 60 miles per hour. Everyone nodded. Now imagine someone magically teleports the truck 10 miles ahead without touching the engine. What happens? Olivia answered immediately. It keeps moving. Nathan nodded. Exactly. Motion does not disappear just because location changes. Mason leaned closer. That is basic physics. Right. Nathan replied. Now replace the truck with a 200,000-ton starship. Nobody answered. Nathan drew another line. The alien equations focus on where the ship exits. They spend centuries making sure the passengers survive the transition. He tapped the board again. But they barely care about what the ship is still carrying after it gets there. Claire crossed her arms. Because nobody wants to arrive at unsafe speeds. Nathan smiled slightly. Exactly. Nobody wants to. The room became uncomfortably quiet. Olivia slowly turned toward him. You are saying the equations allow it. Nathan did not answer immediately. Instead, he reopened the simulation and increased one variable by a fraction of a percent. The holographic display refreshed. A warning flashed briefly before disappearing. Mason stared at the new results. Hold on. He leaned closer until his nose was almost touching the projection. That cannot be right. Nathan folded his arms. That is what I said. Claire quickly checked the calculations herself. Then she opened a second model using an entirely different mathematical framework. 5 minutes later she looked up, her expression noticeably different. I got the same answer. Olivia sat back in her chair. So every faster-than-light jump carries stored momentum through the transition. Nathan nodded once. Apparently. Then why has nobody mentioned this before? Mason asked. Nathan looked toward the large laboratory window where dawn was beginning to brighten the skyline beyond Capital Prime. Because every civilization built this technology for exploration. He paused. Their first instinct was to visit neighbors. Ours was airplanes, railroads, rockets, aircraft carriers, and lunar missions. We spent centuries solving transportation problems by asking what else the vehicle could do. Claire laughed nervously. That is a very human sentence. Nathan looked down at the glowing prism resting on the table. We have a bad habit. Olivia smiled. Curiosity. Nathan shook his head. Repurposing everything. He pointed toward Mason's coffee mug. That mug could hold coffee. Then he pointed toward the heavy laboratory door. Or stop it from closing. He picked up a screwdriver from the workbench. That tool repairs equipment. He spun it once between his fingers. Or opened something nobody intended. Mason finally understood where Nathan's thoughts were heading, and the smile disappeared from his face. Nathan quietly interrupted him. We are thinking about this the wrong way. He highlighted the navigation sequence one last time before speaking the sentence that made the entire room fall silent. What if faster-than-light travel is not the invention? He looked at each member of the team before finishing. What if it has been a delivery system all along, and nobody in 400 years ever realized what it could deliver? Nobody in the room wanted to say the next sentence out loud. Nathan understood why. Some ideas carried a weight that made even experienced engineers hesitate before giving them a voice. He looked around the laboratory, then quietly closed the projection. We are done with simulations, he said. Mason stared at him. You cannot be serious. The math agrees. Nathan reached for his jacket hanging over the back of his chair. Now we find out if reality agrees. Claire immediately shook her head. No, we call Earth first. Nathan nodded. Eventually. But if we report this without evidence, someone will spend the next 6 months arguing over paperwork. Olivia folded her arms. And your solution is to test it before anyone can stop us? Nathan smiled faintly. My solution is to collect enough data so they cannot ignore us. Less than 30 minutes later, the 4 of them stood inside an automated testing hangar located beneath the research annex. Unlike the elegant starships displayed during diplomatic ceremonies, the vehicle waiting inside looked tired. Its gray hull carried years of maintenance patches, faded registration markings, and enough dents to tell a dozen stories. It had once hauled replacement equipment between orbital stations before being retired as obsolete. Nathan ran his hand across the side of the unmanned cargo craft. You deserved a better retirement. Mason checked the diagnostic tablet. Remote controls are online. Navigation systems are stable. Fuel reserves are at 68%. Claire finished connecting a monitoring package to the test vehicle. Every sensor we have is recording. Olivia looked through the reinforced observation window toward the empty, proving range stretching nearly 40 miles into open space. Target. Nathan pointed toward an abandoned nickel-iron asteroid that had drifted into the testing zone years earlier. It measured roughly 300 feet across and had been used countless times for navigation calibration. That rock. Mason looked confused. You could fly around it. Nathan nodded. I could. Or. Nathan answered without changing his calm expression. Or I could arrive exactly where it already is. Silence settled over the hangar. Claire slowly lowered her tablet. Nathan. He met her eyes before she could finish. No explosives. No weapons. No modifications. He gently tapped the hull of the cargo craft. It is still just a delivery truck. Olivia finally understood. You are not changing the ship. Nathan smiled. I am changing the destination. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Nobody spoke. 7, 6. Mason kept glancing between the telemetry screens and Nathan. 5, 4. Claire quietly whispered. Please let the equations be wrong. 3, 2, 1. The unmanned cargo craft disappeared without a flash or dramatic burst of light. It simply ceased to occupy the space where it had been. Every monitor instantly switched to tracking mode. Less than 1 second later, long-range sensors detected the vessel exactly where the calculations predicted. Then every alarm in the control room activated at once. Mason looked down in disbelief. No way. Olivia refreshed the readings twice before speaking. The asteroid. She stopped. Claire zoomed in with the external imaging array. The old calibration target was no longer visible on any scanner. There was no expanding cloud of debris. No thermal bloom. No spectacular explosion. The instruments simply reported empty coordinates where solid rock had existed moments earlier. Nathan remained perfectly still. He had expected surprising data. He had not expected the complete absence of it. The computer displayed a single line beneath the completed jump analysis. Collision event recorded. Navigation successful. Vehicle integrity 100%. Nathan slowly sat down in the nearest chair, staring at those words as if they belonged to someone else. After nearly a full minute, he finally broke the silence. We need to call Earth. Mason looked at him. Because we proved your theory? Nathan slowly shook his head. No. His voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. Because if 4 engineers found this before breakfast. He looked back at the glowing prism resting on the workbench. Then someday someone else will find it too. Nathan expected questions from Earth. He did not expect silence. The encrypted transmission reached Washington in less than 3 seconds. 12 seconds later, every outgoing communication line inside Laboratory 7 shut down automatically. The entertainment screens went dark. Public network access disappeared. Even the coffee machine refused new commands because it had been remotely disconnected from the civilian grid. Mason looked around the room. Well, that feels official. Olivia checked her tablet. Every external channel is blocked. Claire looked toward Nathan. We just got quarantined. Nathan nodded slowly. That means they believe us. 40 minutes later, a secure shuttle descended onto the Research Annex landing platform. No diplomatic markings. No media. No ceremony. Just a matte gray transport escorted by 2 military interceptors. 4 passengers stepped out wearing plain dark suits instead of uniforms. The last person down the ramp was a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and the calm posture of someone used to making difficult decisions. Nathan recognized him immediately. Admiral Benjamin Hayes rarely left Earth unless something had gone very wrong. Hayes entered the laboratory without wasting a second. He shook Nathan's hand, then looked directly at the frozen telemetry still displayed across the main screen. Show me everything. Nobody spoke for nearly an hour except to answer technical questions. Nathan explained the equations. Claire presented the sensor logs. Mason walked through the automated test sequence. Olivia verified every independent measurement. Hayes interrupted only twice, asking the same question in 2 different ways. Can someone reproduce this? Nathan answered honestly both times. Yes. The Admiral nodded once, but did not look relieved. If anything, his expression became heavier. Finally, he walked to the observation window, overlooking the empty proving range. When I graduated from Annapolis, he said quietly, one of my instructors told us that every major shift in history begins with somebody asking the wrong question. Nathan stood beside him. I thought I asked the right one. Hayes looked out at the stars. You did. That is what worries me. He turned back toward the team. How many people know? Olivia answered first. Just us. And now you. Hayes pointed toward the prism resting on the laboratory table. No. Every civilization that gave us this technology knows humans have unrestricted access to it. They just do not know what you discovered. Mason folded his arms. So what happens now? The Admiral remained quiet for several long seconds before answering. Now we assume we are living on borrowed time. Claire frowned. Because someone else might figure it out? Hayes shook his head. No. He looked directly at Nathan. Because eventually someone is going to ask humans what we have been working on for the last 24 hours. The room fell silent again. Nathan leaned against the table, exhausted. I never wanted to build a weapon. Hayes answered immediately. I know. I wanted to understand the physics. I know. Nathan looked down at his hands. It feels different when the equations stop being numbers. Hayes walked over and rested one hand on the old cargo ship telemetry displayed across the monitor. Nathan, every meaningful technology in history started as a tool. Electricity lit homes before it powered fleets. Satellites forecast weather before they guided armies. Nuclear reactors produced energy before they changed geopolitics. He paused before continuing. The technology is never the decision. People are. Nathan let out a slow breath, but the weight on his shoulders did not disappear. Outside the laboratory, the morning sun rose over Capital Prime, and the celebrations from the previous night were still continuing across the city. Families laughed in the streets. News networks praised a new era of cooperation. Children waved Terran and Galactic Compact flags together. None of them knew that inside one quiet laboratory, less than 24 hours after humanity received the greatest scientific gift in galactic history, four engineers and one admiral had already realized the galaxy would never look at faster than light travel the same way again. The quarantine lasted exactly 3 hours before the first official visitor arrived from the Galactic Compact. Nobody announced the inspection. Nobody requested permission. The laboratory doors slid open, and High Chancellor Elian entered with 2 scientific advisors carrying polished data cases. He smiled the same calm, diplomatic smile the entire galaxy had seen during yesterday's ceremony. Dr. Brooks, he said warmly, I hope we are not interrupting your first day with our technology. Nathan stood to greet him. Not at all. Elian glanced around the room. I heard your team worked through the night. That is impressive enthusiasm. Mason forced a polite smile. Engineers are terrible at celebrating. One of the alien advisors chuckled. So we have heard. Elian stepped closer to the workbench where the prism still rested. The Council always enjoys seeing how new civilizations approach the archive. Every species notices something different. Nathan looked at Admiral Hayes before answering. The Admiral gave the smallest possible nod. Stay calm. Nathan understood. We mostly focused on understanding the navigation architecture, he replied. There is far more elegance in the equations than we expected. Elian looked genuinely pleased. That is wonderful to hear. Then he asked the question Hayes had predicted. Have you discovered anything unexpected? The room became perfectly still. Nathan could hear the quiet hum of the ventilation system and the faint clicking of laboratory equipment behind him. He smiled politely. Mostly we discovered how much we still have to learn. It was true, just not the whole truth. Elian studied Nathan's face for several seconds, almost as though he were measuring something invisible. Then his expression softened again. That is the correct attitude. Every young civilization believes the archive contains answers. Eventually they realize it mostly contains better questions. Nathan almost laughed at the irony. If only the Chancellor knew. Claire changed the subject by asking about historical improvements made by older member worlds. The conversation shifted naturally into scientific history. Species after species had refined efficiency, fuel economy, navigation precision, passenger comfort, and long-distance reliability. Every example sounded remarkably familiar. They had all solved the same family of problems. Nobody mentioned momentum. Nobody even came close. Nathan listened carefully, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disbelief growing inside him. They truly had not seen it. The realization was almost harder to accept than the discovery itself. Before leaving, Elian paused beside the observation window overlooking the proving range. Dr. Brooks, he said quietly, there is something I have always admired about humanity. Nathan looked over. What is that? You ask fearless questions. Nathan smiled politely. Sometimes they get us into trouble. Elian laughed. Every civilization says that about its scientists. After the delegation departed, the laboratory doors sealed once again. Nobody spoke until the footsteps disappeared completely. Mason finally let out a long breath. Well, that was uncomfortable. Claire slowly sat down. They have absolutely no idea. Admiral Hayes walked toward the window, watching the Council shuttle disappear into the bright afternoon sky. No, he said. They do not. Nathan remained standing beside the prism, turning the conversation over in his mind. Every example the Chancellor had offered had confirmed the same thing. Hundreds of civilizations had inherited the technology. Every one of them had treated it like a faster road between two places. Humanity had looked at the same equations and immediately wondered what happened during the trip itself. Nathan quietly picked up the prism once more. They spent 4 centuries asking how to travel farther. He looked toward the empty, proving range beyond the glass. We spent less than 1 day asking what else the trip could do. Admiral Hayes slowly nodded, his expression unreadable. And that, he said, is exactly why we cannot let anyone else read your notebook just yet. By the second morning, the secret had already begun changing behavior across the laboratory. Nobody laughed as much. Coffee grew cold on forgotten desks. Every conversation eventually circled back to the same uncomfortable realization. The discovery itself was no longer the biggest problem. Keeping it hidden was. Nathan stood in front of a wall-sized display comparing hundreds of historical engineering papers from the Galactic Archive. Every civilization had published thousands of improvements to faster-than-light travel, better field stability, lower fuel consumption, safer passenger compartments, faster recharge cycles. The list went on for centuries. Yet one search returned almost nothing. Momentum. Nathan quietly shook his head. It really is not here. Olivia looked over from her workstation. Maybe they use another term. I searched 23 languages. Nathan replied. Nothing. Mason rolled his chair back. You know what is bothering me? What? Nathan asked. The fact that the galaxy is full of civilizations much older than ours. Smarter in plenty of areas. More experienced. Better mathematics. Better materials. Better energy systems. Nathan nodded. And? Mason spread his hands. How are we the first people to notice this? Claire answered before Nathan could. Because experience can become blinders. Everyone looked toward her. She shrugged. If your grandparents teach your parents, and your parents teach you, eventually nobody questions the first chapter anymore. Nathan smiled. That sounds exactly right. Before anyone could continue, the laboratory speakers chimed. A secure message had arrived from Earth Command. Admiral Hayes opened it without a word. The room listened as the calm, recorded voice filled the laboratory. Effective immediately, all human faster-than-light research is classified at the highest level. No civilian publication. No interstellar transmission. No demonstration without direct authorization from Earth Command. The message ended. Mason sighed. That did not take long. Hayes looked around the room. There is more. He placed another document onto the central table. It contained only one sentence. Every engineer leaned closer to read it. How many civilian cargo vessels can safely receive faster-than-light upgrades within 30 days? Nathan looked up immediately. No. Hayes met his eyes. No. That question should not be the first one. The Admiral remained calm. What should it be? Nathan answered without hesitation. How do we make sure nobody ever has to use this? Hayes studied him for several seconds before quietly folding the paper in half. I was hoping you would say that. Olivia looked confused. Then why bring it? Hayes smiled for the first time since arriving. Because governments always ask practical questions first. Good scientists remind them to ask moral ones. A comfortable silence settled over the room. Nathan leaned back against the workbench, thinking about every engineer who had contributed to the archive over 4 centuries. None of them had failed. They had simply solved the problems they believed mattered. Humanity had approached the same equations carrying a completely different history. Americans had crossed continents by rail. Pilots had broken sound barriers. Astronauts had walked on the moon. Engineers had spent generations asking how machines behaved when pushed beyond their intended purpose. That habit had not disappeared simply because the machines had become alien. Nathan looked through the laboratory window at the stars beyond Capital Prime. Somewhere out there, millions of people were still celebrating humanity's newest achievement. They believed Earth had finally caught up with the rest of the galaxy. Nathan knew the truth was stranger than that. Humanity had not caught up. Humanity had simply looked in a different direction, and once that happened, there was no way to make the galaxy unsee the question that should have been asked 400 years earlier. Nathan expected another classified meeting. Instead, the invitation came from the Galactic Science Council itself. The message was polite, almost cheerful. The council wanted to hear humanity's first impressions of the faster-than-light archive during an informal scientific roundtable. Admiral Hayes read the invitation twice before placing it on Nathan's desk. "They are not suspicious," he said quietly. "They are curious." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Which makes this harder." 2 hours later, the conference chamber overlooking Capital Prime was filled with researchers from a dozen civilizations. There were no politicians this time, only scientists, professors, and engineers exchanging ideas the way they had for generations. High Chancellor Elian welcomed everyone with the same calm confidence Nathan had come to admire. "Today," Elian said, "we celebrate the beginning of humanity's contribution to our shared body of knowledge. Dr. Brooks, would you care to tell us what surprised your team the most?" Every eye in the room settled on Nathan. He stood slowly, carrying nothing except a small notebook filled with handwritten calculations. He could have hidden behind technical language. He could have changed the subject. Instead, he chose honesty, carefully measured. "The biggest surprise," Nathan said, "was realizing how much your civilization values reliability." Several delegates smiled proudly. Nathan continued, "Every equation we studied reflects the same philosophy. Passenger safety, navigation accuracy, predictable outcomes. It is beautiful engineering." One elderly alien physicist nodded with obvious satisfaction. "We have spent centuries removing unnecessary risk." "I can see that," Nathan replied. "Human engineers admire that work very much." The atmosphere relaxed. Coffee cups lifted. A few delegates exchanged approving looks. Then an insect-like mathematician raised one of his 4 hands. "Dr. Brooks, your team has worked almost continuously since receiving the archive. Surely you found something interesting beyond our established models." Nathan looked briefly toward Admiral Hayes, who remained expressionless near the back of the room. Nathan smiled gently before answering. "We did." The room became noticeably quieter. "What was it?" another scientist asked. Nathan looked down at his notebook for a moment before closing it without opening a single page. "We discovered that humans ask different questions." Several delegates laughed softly, assuming it was modesty. Nathan continued, "Not better questions, just different ones." Elian folded his hands. "Can you give us an example?" Nathan thought carefully before speaking. "Imagine giving the same hammer to 100 carpenters." The delegates nodded. "Most will ask what they can build with it. One child might ask how far it bounces. Another might wonder what sound it makes underwater." More smiles appeared around the room. Nathan continued in the same calm voice. "The hammer did not change. Only the question changed." For a few seconds nobody spoke. Then the elderly physicist chuckled warmly. "That is the advantage of welcoming younger civilizations. Fresh perspectives." Nathan nodded politely. "Exactly." As the discussion moved on to other subjects, Admiral Hayes quietly watched the faces around the room. Nobody looked alarmed. Nobody looked suspicious. They all believed Dr. Brooks had simply offered another philosophical observation about scientific creativity. Only Nathan knew how close he had come to saying too much. As the meeting ended, High Chancellor Elian walked beside him toward the exit. "Dr. Brooks," he said with an approving smile, "I believe humanity will make remarkable contributions to galactic science." Nathan returned the smile. "I hope so." Elian extended his hand. "Never lose that curiosity." Nathan shook it firmly. "We will not." As Elian walked away, Nathan looked down at his closed notebook. Inside were the calculations that could change space travel forever. Yet he realized something even more important. The galaxy did not fear humanity because humans were stronger. They did not even know enough to be afraid. They still believed they had given Earth a remarkable machine. They had not yet realized they had accidentally given humanity an entirely new way of thinking about the universe. 3 months later, the official report released by the Galactic Compact described humanity's first integration into faster-than-light research as an overwhelming success. New trade routes opened. Shipping costs dropped. Scientific cooperation reached record levels. Historians would later call it the beginning of a golden age between Earth and the stars. They were not wrong. They simply did not know the whole story. Deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains, inside a facility that officially did not exist, the original prism rested inside a transparent vault protected by layers of security that even most world leaders never knew existed. It was not locked away because humanity feared the technology. It was protected because humanity respected the questions it had created. Nathan Brooks stood quietly in front of the vault on his final day before returning home. Admiral Benjamin Hayes joined him carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one over without saying a word. They stood there for nearly a minute, watching the soft blue light pulse inside the prism. Finally, Hayes broke the silence. "You know, every government on Earth asked me the same question." Nathan smiled faintly. "How quickly can we build more?" Hayes nodded. "You know what I told them?" Nathan looked over. "What?" The Admiral took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I told them the smartest thing humanity has done in the last 24 hours was deciding to slow down." Nathan laughed quietly. That must have surprised them. It did. Hayes smiled. "Engineers always want to solve the next problem. Politicians always want the next advantage. But civilization survives because somebody eventually asks whether every solution actually needs to become a race." A week later, Nathan was back in Seattle. The rain had returned exactly as he remembered it. His small house looked unchanged. His neighbors still struggled every Tuesday morning to start the same old lawn mower. Children still rode bicycles down the sidewalk after school. The grocery store still sold terrible coffee near the checkout line. After everything that had happened, ordinary life felt almost unbelievable. One afternoon, his father visited and found Nathan sitting on the back porch staring at a notebook that remained closed on the table. "Thinking about work?" his father asked. Nathan smiled. "Trying not to." His father pulled up a chair. "Did you save the galaxy?" Nathan laughed. "No." "Break anything?" Nathan thought about the abandoned asteroid, the equations, the meetings, and the secret that now rested behind reinforced walls thousands of miles away. Then he slowly shook his head. "I think we just asked a question nobody else had asked." His father nodded as if that explained everything. Sometimes that is enough. Years later, engineering students across Earth would hear a story about Dr. Nathan Brooks. Most versions exaggerated the details. Some claimed he invented a revolutionary drive. Others insisted he built the most powerful system ever created. Nathan always corrected them. "I invented nothing," he would say. "The equations were already there. The technology already existed. We simply looked at it without assuming the previous generation had already asked every important question." That lesson quietly spread far beyond engineering. Teachers repeated it in classrooms. Parents shared it with curious children. Scientists wrote it on laboratory walls. Not because it was about faster than light travel, but because it was about something much older than technology. Every generation inherits tools from the people who came before. The real test is not whether we know how to use them. The real test is whether we have the courage to look at them with fresh eyes, ask one honest question that everyone else overlooked, and then possess enough wisdom to decide that not every discovery must become power. Sometimes the greatest strength a civilization can show is not what it is capable of building. It is what it chooses to leave unused.